So we'll start off with introductions. As Ollie said, I'm actually not the founder of NoCode.tech. The founder is this chap here with the beanie on. I actually founded NoCode.tech back in 2016. The no-code community or the no-code space now. Back actually in 2013, when kind of the only tools that were out there were Webflow and Bubble, and then there we go. And then as things have got kind of more popular over the years, and more people have started to kind of learn about no-code, then NoCode.tech has kind of become a big informational site, big educational site, and I've been along for that journey as Ollie says. So you guys want to go and introduce yourselves. Alex, you want to start first?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Alex Rice, co-founder and chief product officer of SimplyCare, which is a digital tool for family carers and the folks that their elderly loved ones that they care for, to help them keep their loved ones safe, healthy, and happy at home. And we actually built our MVP using Bubble. So kind of new into the current application of no-code tools. I've been using Bubble for about 8 or 9 months, and it's really kind of opened my eyes into what's possible for non-tech co-founders.
Super. My name's Caitlin McDonald. I'm with Creative Informatics, which you can all see on your lovely lanyards. We're sponsoring the event today, and we work with the creative and technology community in Edinburgh to try and promote the connection between those two things. I'm also a creative artist myself, and I use no-code to create some of the art that I've done. And in a previous life, I worked as a technology strategist as well.
I'm Victor. I'm the development lead at Cobry. Cobry are also sponsoring this event. You can find us over there in the other room. And we are Google Cloud partners, have been so for 8 years now. And you might be thinking, what does Google have to do with no-code? Well, recently Google acquired the wonderful no-code tool called AppSheet. And since that acquisition, we've been deploying, training, and servicing organizations, big and small, on the AppSheet platform. So I've done a lot of the work that comes with training, delivery, and the services associated with AppSheet and business processes. So I'm kind of approaching from the more business and corporate side of the discussion here.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we'll just go ahead, get started. Now, I think obviously the idea of no-code, it's kind of a term that's been really bandied about in the last couple of years, but the idea of actually having a graphical interface to create code and design applications has been around for a while, and I think if any of you have been in the tech scene for a very long time, you'll remember things like Adobe Dreamweaver. So we'd love to get the panel's thoughts on what's different now, what's changed in this current incarnation that's made no-code so popular. Maybe start with yourself, Caitlin.
Sure. So I actually have questions about this myself because I'm listening to some of the panelists speak earlier, of the presentations that happened earlier, and I'm kind of thinking about the various SaaS tools that already exist and various things. And it's like, this is interesting because it kind of takes us back and forward at the same time. And as we were preparing for this panel, I was talking to the other panelists and I was thinking about the way that generally innovations and iterations of tools open up new possibilities. So I kind of was thinking about the idea of the spreadsheet as something that really, the most boring thing you can imagine, although I obviously love them, but it really opened up informative possibilities for people who previously didn't use those things in their work. They previously depended on other people who had very specialist knowledge to work with data in that way. And now you can do anything in a spreadsheet, from planning your Christmas dinner to running an entire organization. And I feel like no-code very similarly. And actually, just as we were finishing up the last presentation, somebody said something about abstraction. And I think that that's really a key word of today, which is that no-code, just like various types of code before it, it just adds another layer of abstraction. So if you think about the kind of strata layers going through, you've got like really raw code at the bottom, and then at the top you have, for people who are less specialist, accessibility of tools that are, as other people have said, less flexible, but more accessible to lots of people.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, especially around abstraction. And what about yourself, Victor? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, accessibility is a huge part when it comes to taking on an application and building it using a no-code tool. And I think the wonderful thing that we're kind of seeing on the market is the breadth of no-code offerings that we currently have. So whether you want to build a full-fledged application and deploy it to millions of users, or whether you're building a small business process and making life easy for your colleagues and maybe your managers, there will be a no-code tool for that. So I think what we're seeing as we go forwards over the next couple of years is the kind of breadth of no-code tools available to us to use. And the accessibility, as you mentioned, more people are going to start having their eyes open to the fact that, hold on, we've got this process in a spreadsheet, we can actually turn this into a process that's much more easy for users to do and to go through. So I think accessibility is a huge part there as well.
I think as well, one of the other innovations is as you think about the ecosystem that grows up around these things, you might have some types of roles that shift the types of things that you're doing, but you also have new roles that emerge as a result of having different types of tools that are accessible to different levels of specialism. And you have new specialisms that emerge out of that, and the whole cycle just continues.
Totally agree. And so that probably actually brings me quite nicely on to, I think earlier, I think it was Max's talk, he was talking about, what kind of large organisations can adopt no-code, and I think we all know at this point it's really well adopted in the sort of hobbyist and maker spaces and the startup world as well. But maybe start with yourself, Alex. We'd love to get your thoughts on how do you think large organisations are going to start to adopt no-code and what's it going to look like in there?
Yeah. Well, so obviously I'm a co-founder of a startup, which is a very small organization, but I come from a background in home health consulting, which was working with really large home health organizations. And I think there might be a bit of a misconception of large organizations not using no-code tools. So we actually was kind of thinking back on my old work history, and we used some no-code tools like Atlassian and Jira and QuickBase, and we're sort of modeling these different kind of SaaS tools to meet our needs, especially for large organizations that are doing things that are sort of atypical, not a CRM, but kind of trying to adapt tools to their unique kind of situation and their operations, especially around automation. So I think it's kind of been around for a while, just more maybe from an operations standpoint. I think where I would imagine we're going to see a lot of change is in sort of the front end. So playing around with design, customer experience, things like that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense as well. We talk a lot about, all the kind of new fancy tools like Bubble and Adalo and Glide, etc. But when you think about it, stuff like Salesforce is in a way a no-code tool that the enterprise have been using for decades, And Victor, your company obviously kind of specialise in this, so what do you think?
Yeah, so operations is a huge part, and organizations at the end of the day want to see ROI. They want to see the return on investment. So if you can deploy an application and deploy a process quickly, efficiently, and well, both from the technical aspect, which is getting easier and easier as these no-code tools come out, but also the kind of soft cultural aspect. That's a really, really important part of what we do at Cobry, is not only deploying these tools, which is now actually quite easy to do from a technical aspect, but also making sure that the user adoption is there, and we prove to the organizations that the ROI is there as well, both quantitatively and qualitatively. So we record metrics on usage, we record how much money the organization is saving, but also do user surveys and things like that to ensure that stakeholders know that what they paid for using this no-code tool is actually making them a better business and is making sure that they're getting the return on investment. So when it comes to taking these no-code tools and the adoption in large organizations, it's all about how you can present it to stakeholders and demonstrate the value of them. And I think it's getting easier and easier and easier to do as these wonderful tools are coming out into the workplace.
I also think it fills in some of the different gaps that the large organizations have. I was looking at like A&E television network uses Airtable now, so I think they're finding tools where maybe there are some gaps in their sort of organizational structure or in their skill sets or capabilities where they can use no-code tools to fill in those gaps seamlessly.
I'm especially interested in your perspective, Alexandra, on no-code and essentially the regulated industries, because of course you work in healthcare, and there are a lot of really specialist considerations around privacy and data security and information. So how have you found the challenges around that, if any?
Yeah, absolutely. So at least from our perspective, one of the reasons why we also chose Bubble is its GDPR compliance. And I think when you think about taking in sensitive data and information, you really have to be kind of careful about which tools you use in the back end. I think Software in their presentation had a really great point about not using Airtable for their user stored data. And so I think kind of the direction of no-code tools is taking into consideration those compliance aspects.
Brilliant. Now, I think when we obviously large organisations taking on no-code, all that's kind of fairly obvious. But we'd love to hear your views on what are some of the kind of, I guess, non-obvious opportunities that are going to come up in no-code either now or that you think might emerge in the future. And we'll go to some audience questions in a second, but Caitlin, I'm going to go to yourself first of all on that question. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like you said earlier, there's a fairly extensive already kind of hobbyist use. And actually, that's kind of how I came to no-code as well, or also code and like low, easy beginner code as well, because I have a background in data analytics, and often what I was finding is the data engineers I was working with had a very particular way of thinking about, and the software engineers I was working with, very separate things, had very specific ways of thinking about how they like to organize data, the kinds of tools that they would use to do that. And then, of course, we in analytics land had a very separate kind of language around business intelligence and the kinds of tools and the way that we wanted to structure information for the executives that we were reporting to. And often there was kind of this clash of heads around how you would talk about this stuff. And because I have a background as an anthropologist, I often think about these things and you're like, okay, well, actually, we're describing the same thing here. We're just using different language to do it. And so one of the ways that I kind of got over my fear of having to work with these different but the same informational systems and learn to speak the language of each other was to have some projects that I was working on that were very low stakes for me. So they were usually artistic or creative or just fun. And so that was the way that and it's like there's no business risk in me going off and learning to take a neural net and feed some photos into that and see what comes out of it. That's not what our business is doing. So, but it teaches me a lot about data structures and how to transfer, especially large volumes of data from one place to another and things like that. So that was really useful. And I used that to develop a project which I've been calling an AI-assisted pandemic memoir. Which is exactly what I just described. So this was a photo project, and then I paired a bunch of images with the diary entries that I was writing during that period. But I've also done things like I took the complete works of Gilbert and Sullivan. If you know them, they wrote comic operas in like the 1880s, and I fed that into a text generation neural network, and it came out with some very, very funny things that it said. And I created a chatbot, and this was completely no code at all. It was using a tool called Cheap Bots Done Quick, which you can use to create a Twitter bot in like minutes. And it was just really fun to do, and it's a way of kind of just tapping into that, playful, fun, creative side that gets you thinking about, well, what if I did this? What if this happened? And, there's no risk to your business or anything like that. You're just having fun, and then you can go back and actually use those skills in your day job as well.
Yeah, I guess it reduces the barrier of entry when it comes to experimentation. So maybe an idea or a process that hasn't been thought of before because the budget wasn't there, the skills weren't there. It opens up almost like a can of worms when it comes to organizations experimenting and trying new things. And if you want to be a disruptive organization, you got to take a chance with some of these kind of high risk, low reward, or high risk, high reward maybe, things that usually an organization won't have the budget for. Yeah. So with the entry of low code, you're able to kind of create a group of citizen developers that can take risks that may potentially lead to a lot of revenue and a lot of money down the line, which is a wonderful thing.
I also think there's an opportunity to, as you're developing, bring the customer in earlier with no-code tools. So you can sort of use them as prototyping, but they're so functional that you can really have the users, you can kind of develop real time alongside the users so they can see their own inputs in real time, which I think is really changing the game in terms of user-centered design and usability.
Yeah, one of the things we love doing at Cobry, we have a service where we just have a morning with a stakeholder. 4 hours, let's start from scratch. And let's build you something. Yeah. And the wonderful thing about no-code is after 4 hours, we've got something that they can actually go out and use, which is incredible. Because you're demonstrating value 4 hours in. I don't know any other service or offering that can demonstrate value so quickly, unless you're selling like a SaaS tool or something that's already made. But to have something so bespoke and so custom and ready to use after a morning session, maybe an afternoon as well if you want to add an extra couple of features. I've never seen anything quite like it before.
And is this all an AppSheet, Victor, or are you using other no-code tools as well?
We specialize in AppSheet, so that's where most of my development is done. That's usually how we demonstrate value to stakeholders. They usually have a spreadsheet process or a process that happens over mobile phones. Sometimes even, God forbid, noted down on paper, scanned in and filed away. So AppSheet has a whole host of features that allow, such as OCR, character recognition, geotagging, things like that help you streamline data entry and data processes. So most of the things that we talk about, or I talk about, come from the AppSheet perspective. However, this is usually quite ubiquitous in the fact that whether you're using Bubble or something else, you could totally demonstrate value to stakeholders after a 4-hour development session with them.
Yeah, totally agree. And so, what are the maybe a question for all three of you actually? But what are either the biggest or the most interesting or the most kind of complex no-code use cases you've seen? I mean, I think we've seen a lot of interesting stuff today on the simpler end, on the complex end. We've seen what software could do, but I always feel like I'm on Twitter and stuff like that, and people are just putting up these big pictures of these massive, ugly no-code workflows, but they're doing something really powerful in there. So yeah, really interested to hear some of the use cases you guys have seen. What about yourself, Caitlin?
Do you know, what I would really love to experience is a kind of surprise moment where you're using something and then it's like, surprise, all of this was built with NoCode. Haha, we fooled you. That would be really great. And I actually don't have an example of that. But if anybody wants to post on Twitter or something like that, I would love to hear from other people on what they've experienced where they're like, I had no idea this was NoCode.
Yeah.
So.
I will actually plug that our app I never thought that we'd be able to reach the complexity that we were able to reach at such an early stage. So one of the kind of key components to our app is flexibility. So customers can add custom questions, they can track those, add and remove and change kind of the nature of the app themselves. And I didn't think that I'd be able to work in that level of flexibility. And so our app is way more complex than I think we originally thought. We don't consider it an MVP at this point. It's sort of beyond. And I don't think I thought that NoCode, specifically Bubble, would be able to take us that far.
Totally agree. What yourself, Victor?
One of my favorite use cases and success stories by the AppSheet team is the fact that Toyota, a huge organization, modernized their entire production line using AppSheet in less than a half year. So with no-code platforms, and this one's kind of aimed at enterprise and business, you can deploy within minutes. You can update within minutes. And the fact that you can take a paper-based process or a spreadsheet-based process and turn it into something that is deployed on every engineer's application on their personal or work phone is extremely powerful. So in terms of complexity, I think that it's still a simple project. It's still a project that was, in essence, just a data entry kind of upgrade when it comes to the production line. But I think it's just the sheer impact that had. And again, talking about ROI and time saved and things like that, that has huge impact on the actual bottom line.
Yeah, and what kind of scale was that at? How many people were using that? And
so in terms of the engineers, there's a wonderful customer success story online on the actual AppSheet website. So if you want more details regarding user numbers, time to completion, and things like that, there's a whole PDF that you can read, and I do encourage you all to read it because it's quite inspiring. But we're talking thousands of end users, so there's lots out there, and it's all centrally managed. Again, kind of plug in Google here. It's all done using identity and access management from one platform, so it can all be managed directly using one centralized location. It doesn't even have to be on site because it's all managed using the cloud. So that's kind of the benefits of buying into an ecosystem that's so forward thinking and friendly when it comes to development and administration.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the questions I get asked a lot, from people on NoCode.tech or other people that I'm talking to about NoCode is, can it scale? And I think these kind of stories are a good example. But I was speaking to someone a couple of days ago who has a mobile app running on Glide, which is a really easy mobile app builder you might have heard of. And it's got 350,000 users on it. I've heard of Bubble apps with close to 1 million. I think there's a real perception that, someone alluded to earlier, NoCode is absolutely well known for MVPs and prototypes and that kind of thing. But, when it comes to the kind of hairier things, I think people go, nah, you need to go to code. And I have to disagree with that. I think we hear these examples. It's very much a way of working, a way of development that can scale usually a lot higher than people think. And I think the thing I tell people as well is, if you're thinking about building a no-code app and you're worried about scale, probably by the time it becomes a problem, you'll have enough money to solve that problem. It's always been my experience with people that I've worked with and clients, etc. But it probably does bring us to an interesting controversial question then, which of course is, is it true that Glasgow is better than Edinburgh? But no, the controversial question, that completes any no-code panel is this: will no-code replace coding? And I'd love to hear your opinion first, Victor.
Well, you need someone to write the no-code platforms first, right? So it's kind of a paradox. No, the bottom line is no. There is a level of complexity that you will reach at one point, or you may not reach, that is impossible to build using a no-code editor. Whether that's as you're growing early on or later down your kind of app evolution, there will be a point that you might have to bring in someone that knows how to code. But no, there's too much bespoke things being made in the back end, and it's, as you said, it's really good for a proof of concept, and it can scale. There have been organizations that demonstrate that that no-code platforms can scale to hundreds of thousands, even God forbid, million users. There will be a point in time in which you've got a certain functionality or a certain point in your product lifespan that you might have to say, actually, we need a developer to either help us expand on what's going on in this no-code platform, maybe integrate an API, or maybe add maybe a sub-service, a microservice, or you might say, actually, we really want to productize this, and we really want to have everything in control, so we're going to hire a small software development team and turn this into a fully fledged, I don't know, Kubernetes app or something that's a bit more scalable. So that's my answer, I guess, yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And Alex, I think you were saying last night when we were chatting, so your company was, originally are still built on Bubble,
Yeah.
but you're now, you're kind of, I think, down the funding journey. You're starting to integrate things like AWS or
That's
Amazon
right.
Web Services. How are you kind of finding that?
Yeah, so we are actually kind of thinking of Bubble as sort of the front end aspect of the app, and we are about to bring in machine learning, AI, big data, and so we're actually building out an AWS platform that will manage that aspect and then link into Bubble. And kind of strategically, we're thinking about that scaling a little bit easier, able to kind of focus and use Bubble on the iterative customer side, customer aspect of it, whereas the sort of data science kind of sits in the back end on our own AWS kind of platform.
Now, I've got a wee follow-up question on that, but just before I come to it, because it's changing the topic slightly, Caitlin, I'd love to get your view as well on this controversial topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know that there will always be room for people who want to roam freely in the wilds of code, And actually, we talked a little bit, again, as we were preparing, about the idea of GitHub's, what's it called, Copilot, and we're like, well, actually, is that a no-code tool in itself? Which is an interesting question, I think. But also, there are a couple of considerations around having a staging environment, for example, or version control, which are already kind of built into work process flows for existing big coding projects that I think no-code still has to resolve if it wants to really support some of those things. And those are design challenges that are, overcomable. It's absolutely possible to build those workflows. I just don't think they exist yet. So I think the future of what this looks like is certainly there will still be people whose jobs it is to do programming, but the nature of those jobs might change quite considerably. And we've already talked about other kinds of jobs that are enabled through no-code. So that's where I think it's going.
Makes a lot of sense. And one thing I will share is, running a kind of large no-code educational site, I get a surprise amount of hate mail from developers. I had one chap who sent me a very explicitive email, and then a month later asked me for a job. So I think I'm starting to get a panic about his developing skills.
Yeah, that guy definitely doesn't have a job, a future in no-code, but everyone else is probably fine.
Yeah, totally an interesting approach from him, but it didn't work for us. So actually, talking about hiring, so this is what I wanted to bring back to you, Alex.
Yeah.
So obviously, you're building with no-code, but you're also building, I guess, a real dev team who are looking
Absolutely.
at your AWS, etc.
Yep.
How do you go about hiring for no-code skills? Have you got something that says we need a Bubble dev with 2 years experience, or how does that work?
Well, I think, so that is such a good question, and we are in the process of trying to answer that question. So if there's anyone out there who wants to chat with me about that, I'm very open to it. But I think the way that we sort of see it as, the AWS side of things is the skill set that we're sort of targeting, and then anyone can kind of learn and get up the learning curve on Bubble, and we can sort of incorporate that in. So we're sort of looking at the developer side of the skill set, and then thinking that we can train up, on the Bubble side.
Makes a lot of sense, makes a lot of sense. And got an interesting one just coming in from the audience here as well. So do you think a tool slash software as a service built on a no-code platform could be sold? You know, the exit strategy obviously in many companies is to be acquired or to sell the business, and I think in startup culture that's kind of revered, you know. But, you know, is it actually possible to sell something on no-code? What do we think? Alex?
Yeah, I think absolutely. So I think it depends on what the tool is. You know, what kind of the nature of the specific application is. But you know, speaking specifically about Bubble, so we don't own the code, but we own the design, we own the workflows, we own the back end. So those are kind of all things that are proprietary to SimplyCare, and so we have IP, you know, in the no-code tools that we use. So I think absolutely.
You guys agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if you've got a proof of concept, if you've got a good idea, and if you've got the IP, and you've built it and you've demonstrated the value, there's no reason, to me, there's no reason why, if you wanted to sell and if you wanted to exit, why that would be a detriment to whoever's interested, that you've built the platform on no code. What that suggests is that actually you've got quite to me, that there's a higher trajectory path, because you've got that kind of infrastructure already there. You don't have to think about building out the infrastructure to scale, because as you said, Bubble can scale to 1 million plus. And if you've got a good roadmap for your product, and you know that roadmap can be built using these no-code tools, or you've got a plan for it, then I don't see why there's any reason as to why you couldn't sell if you built your platform on a no-code platform, I guess.
I totally agree. I mean, one thing I'll share, you know, on the side I like to kind of buy and sell really small kind of tech companies, which is how I ended up with NoCode.tech in the first place, and is also how I own some other companies like Adam Network. And broadly, one of the things I try to look at now if I'm looking to buy a company is, can I take its entire product and replace it with no code? You know, rather than take something on. I mean, anyone here who can code and has looked at anything another developer has built before, you know, it's kind of like going into your friend's house and having to clean it for them. It's just disgusting. You don't want to deal with it, you know. Yeah, I 100% think, you know, not only can you buy and sell no-code projects, but I think that's going to be a big thing in the kind of coming couple of years as well. But it does bring us to an interesting question from the audience. Do you worry about any negative effects no-code will have on the templification or templatification of applications and the web? You know, will the boundaries of tools cause a bottleneck of creativity? And I guess the idea there is, you know, if we look at no-code tools where a lot of the output can be very, very similar or look very similar, you know, are we going to end up in a world where all the software looks the same and feels the same and works the same? Any thoughts from yourselves on that?
I guess the market dictates, right? So if there's a formula for an application that works really well, and there's a no-code tool that helps achieve that, I mean, we're already kind of already seeing the templatification, was that the word, of websites we use day to day. You know, design trends come and go, application trends come and go as well, and I think it's going to be exactly the same with no code. If there's a platform with a template that works, people are going to use it, and we might see it a little bit. But at the end of the day, if it's a good application and it's an application that people use, I don't see why that's a problem. If people want to go down the custom route, nobody's stopping you, right? And I guess to answer the question of whether the templatification is a problem, I don't think it is. I think it's actually kind of frees the boundaries of creativity rather than constrains them.
I sometimes like to think about questions like this as if there weren't any code involved at all. If you were just thinking about a physical design process, for example, and if you think about the tools that you might use to make a chair or a table, you know, we saw an example earlier, of course, of the wonderful Swedish flat pack furniture maker, and you come up with something that's a design, or, you know, if you really want to go and become a qualified carpenter and build something that's beautiful and unique, you can do that. There's nothing stopping you, aside from the amount of time and effort that it would take to do that. So I think that's really what it comes back to is this a problem? It depends on whether you think that in itself, the idea of, you know, quick and cheap, replaceable and repeatable processes are a problem.
It's a really great point.
Yeah, thanks.
Makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions we had from the audience as well. So one person asked, do you feel secure, and this is a question for you, sorry Alex in particular, do you feel secure in using Bubble, especially considering that you must have medical related data stored? And then to build on that, someone else asked, is copyright an issue for no-code tools? So, you know, I think there's a thought there around, clearly with no-code tools and platforms, you don't own the code, or maybe you do, depending on the platform, but you know, you're not writing it, you can't really access it, and you know, in theory your data is also sitting somewhere. You know, they say it's AWS, it could be anywhere. So, you know, I'd love to hear from yourself. First of all, Alex, you know, how does that kind of affect your business, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, it was absolutely a major consideration for us. So, you know, Bubble does use AWS, and as I said, they're GDPR compliant, but we have to get our own compliance for ourselves because we do own the data. And so we've gone through a kind of long process of going through the compliance with a compliance officer to make sure that, you know, we were protecting everyone's data, making sure that encryption happened when necessary. And it's actually one of the reasons why we are taking the AWS approach kind of offline, so that the big data kind of analytics is happening outside of Bubble, and then only the necessary information is going to be pushed back into Bubble in a visual format.
Makes a lot of sense. And Victor, you must have some views on that as well, given all the clients you work with.
Yeah, so we're cloud first at Cobry, mainly Google Cloud, and Google Cloud is a data processor. Mm-hmm. So we come across this challenge a lot. Not just no-code, even just, you know, data processing using Google Workspace. Yep. You know, if your organization uses Gmail, does that mean that the data you move in and out of Gmail needs to be compliant? And the answer is yes. There's a huge hub of information on the Google side. I'm sure there's also the same on the Azure AWS side as well. And they'll have compliance officers to help you or us, the partners, and you, the client, become compliant. So, you know, there's a huge high compliance sector, whether that's law, health, legal, and they all run on Google, they all run on AWS, and they have found success. So there 100% are ways to stay compliant on the cloud. Usually if you're using a SaaS tool, you are on the cloud, you are using someone else's processing power. And there are agreements that you can put in place with third-party data processors to ensure that they guarantee the fact that you're staying compliant. Mm-hmm. So there are ways to do it. It is a journey, and I'm sure you you felt it. Yeah. But yeah, it's possible, and it's something that is definitely a worry, both in large and small businesses. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely a concern that can be mitigated and worked with.
Yeah, I think there is now starting to become a kind of well-trodden path to compliance using no-code tools. So there are kind of a lot of resources out there. And just like Google, Bubble does kind of walk you through. There's a data protection agreement and sort of legal team that kind of helps folks like us maintain and reach GDPR compliance. So.
And one of the things that working with a no-code platform could technically introduce here, and I get asked this a lot, is, you know, don't you worry that Bubble or Google might just decide one day, we're going to switch you off, could be for whatever reason, but, you know, suddenly your code is gone, your product is gone. I mean, I live in fear, and NoCode.tech primarily gets traffic from SEO, and so I live in fear of what Google is going to decide. They did an algorithm update last week. So that was a kind of sleepless night. It worked out well for us, thankfully. But, you know, I always have that kind of risk from Google, and you must feel it, Victor, with you know, with your clients. You must feel it, Alex, with Bubble. But, you know, how do you kind of think about that with yourself, Alex?
I think that could happen kind of with any software tool, any database, you know, any sort of tool that you're using to build an app, not necessarily no code. From a Bubble perspective, you know, they have an agreement that if they ever went out of business, they would release the code for your application, which is, you know, a little bit of a nice, you know, support there for any sort of worry. But yeah, I think, you know, we rely on tools every day to kind of do their job. And so, yes, I worry about it, but I would worry about it, you know, even if we had a team of developers and, you know, everything was stored and we controlled everything, you know, ourselves.
Yeah. And is that a problem in your space, Caitlin?
I think, so the way that creative informatics works is we work with a lot of individual entrepreneurs and small and large organizations to assist them on their creative and technical journeys. And so the answer, again, is yes, it is a worry, but also it's very, you know, just as Alex has said, it's a worry that you have with a number of things. And I think the kind of data protection concerns are also very similar. Think of all the big name groups that we all know have had data breaches as well, and we're talking about large groups that you would expect to have protection in place. Like GoDaddy recently came out and they've had a bunch of problems with WordPress, and who's like, the granddaddy of them all when it comes to no-code tools. It's like, these things happen, and I'm not saying that is a minimization by any means of the concerns that people should have about this. It's just the way that you manage it if you are doing all that in-house versus building on other tools. You have different flows for how you get that information, how you think about it, and the protections that you have to put in place around it.
Exactly right. It's all about risk management. So it's almost if you have a procurement team, or if you're a team that decides on what software and what vendors to use, there is always a risk of that vendor, going bust, or restricting access to what your relationship and changing the contract and things like that. So what you've got to do, you've got to pick a trusted vendor, or you've got to try to pick a tool that has a good exit migration strategy, such as yourself. They'll release the code. That's new information to me. That's that's actually really cool that they do that they offer that. So it's a decision that you have to make if you do decide to go down this route. And the thing is, we make these decisions every day without really thinking much of it whenever we procure new software. So it's definitely a risk that you've got to take. However, if Bubble once decide to go down, or if Google goes down, God forbid, I think we've got a bigger problem on our hands than maybe the product that we've got. And maybe it would be a huge deal if that happened, and there would be plans, and there would be other people that would feel the same way as you. So. It is a risk, and it's if you're doing risk management, it's something that should be noted 100%. But it's also about managing that risk, and what would the strategy be had that risk occurs.
And I think actually that's a really great point, that in large organizations, they typically manage this through a procurement process, and there are kind of very set procedures around how you deal with that.
That's right.
Whereas if you're a smaller organization, or even a big one, and you're experimenting with a new way of doing things, then you have to think about that in a different way. So your procurement procedure might not be set up to assess those risks in the way that they need to be assessed, really.
You've got me thinking there, Victor. I'm surprised there's not been a movie yet about what happens if Google disappears off the face of the earth, or but we'll take it to a slightly happier place. Got a wee question from the audience here. What are you most optimistic about for NoCode in the future? We'll start with yourself again, Victor.
I don't know. I haven't thought about this too much. I guess the job opportunities and the growth that we're going to experience. So growth usually happens using an S curve. You've got the initial people that are excited about the product, then there's a huge acceleration curve, and it kind of flatlines. And I think we're at a really, really exciting time right now where we've not really fully understood the real core benefits of using no-code applications, both in startups and in enterprise. So I think we're still quite early on in that S curve growth. So I think, as you said, the future is bright, and I think that there's going to be a lot of jobs, lots of employment, and it's going to be a growing market, and a very fast-growing market in the next coming years. So that's what I'm really excited about. I'm really excited to see people specialize in Bubble. So how do you hire for a Bubble engineer? Is that a thing that's going to be normalized in 2-3 years' time? I hope so. So I think that's what I'm most excited about in the next coming years.
And a question on that, maybe for the audience: how many people here actually, no-code is their living, their source of income? How many people here are actually doing no-code for a living? One tentative, two there. So I think is an interesting thought, right? I mean, here we have clearly a bunch of people who are very interested in no-code, or are already no-code enthusiasts, and so far, not many of us, actually make a living full-time from no-code. So I think it shows we're very much at that early adopter stage, and I think especially as kind of large companies, etc., start to adopt it, we'll see more and more of these jobs pop up. I mean, I keep seeing stuff on Twitter for no-code ops or Airtable specialists or that kind of thing. But what else are we optimistic on? What about yourself, Caitlin?
I occasionally like to look really far in the future. So we're thinking, it's 2050. The sea levels have risen. Really optimistic. We've talked about layers of abstraction, right? So we have iterations of layers of abstraction happening through the continuous evolution of new forms of code, new forms of no code. So what's the next thing that's beyond no code? What's the abstraction that's above that? I'm really interested to find out about that.
Links to the brain. Think of an app and it happens.
Zuckerberg's right there with you.
Well, there is that, I don't know if people in the audience have seen this, but there is a tool called Codex by OpenAI, sorry, which is a kind of Elon Musk like AI company, and they've maybe heard of GPT-3. But anyway, they released this little demo where you could just tell the computer to build a game. So you would just say to it like, okay, so put a picture of a spaceship in and make it go from left to right, and when the user presses the space bar, make it shoot, and you literally just type that in, the way I'm saying it, word for word, and it started to create the game in front of you. And that came out maybe 3 months ago. But, it's something I'm, on the one hand, really, really interested in, but I'm also like, wow, maybe that's going to cannibalise NoCode. Maybe NoCode will simply just be saying, I want this, make it happen,
Well, that's actually a thing, yeah. They're using GPT-3. There is software out there. You can type the description of a website. I want a search bar with a button that takes you to the index page. Underneath it, 3 pictures and a carousel. And as you type this, on a text editor on the right hand side, the page is actually forming as you type it.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the next leap. Maybe that's the 2050.
Future in action.
Anything else you're optimistic for, Alex?
I'd say the one thing that comes to mind is not just the different types of jobs that are coming up the pipeline, but also who will be able to get jobs in tech. So like at Simply Care, one of our visions is to be able to hire carers, so family carers, who the majority are over 50. So these are folks who've sort of been left out of the tech space and actually have lost their jobs due to caring. So we see an opportunity to be able to give jobs to people in tech, great jobs that are flexible, and sort of skill them up into the no-code space. And it kind of does 2 things. It helps kind of create this sort of job market, but it also, for us, from a customer's perspective, is to give customers the tools to build, with us.
Yeah, I like that. And I don't know, is there anyone here from the Data Lab? Well, so Data Lab, if you don't know, is an organisation in Edinburgh who, as the name suggests, can work with data. And I was speaking to someone there recently, and what they're doing is they've kind of set together like a fund or a training programme where they're trying to help people who have lost their jobs maybe due to automation. They're trying to give them data skills so that they can become the automators and they can start to sort of retrain. I think we're going to see more and more of that.
Absolutely.
So I think we'll go to one last question for today, which is, we've talked a little bit there about what we're optimistic for in the future, how we're going to get there, how we're going to get to this mass adoption. But what do we see as the blockers to mass adoption? What do we think we've got to overcome before we can get to this utopia? Sorry, Alex.
Personally for myself, I think there is, we've talked a lot today about, simple kind of drag and drop and citizen designers and citizen creators, and I think that's great. But if you're building sort of more complex applications, you do need to have that skill set and understanding of what database structures are going to be optimal for your application, how to keep your workflows and queries simple and efficient and scalable. And that's a skill set that I am very new to, and have had to kind of seek out collaboration and partnerships on to understand that. So it's like Bubble's like a blank canvas, and you can build anything, and you can build it so it works for 1 or 2 users, but to have it and make sure that it works for 1,000 users in a flexible, adaptable application, that's a very different story. So I think it's kind of about educating yourself in terms of the architecture, database, all of the kind of high skill aspects of developing an app.
Yeah, all the parts that are essentially coding, It's
Yeah.
all in there, something
It is,
hidden
it's there,
away.
yeah.
What about yourself, Gail?
Yeah, I think a few things we've talked about already, one of which is staging environments and testing and version control. Accessibility as well, as in compliance with accessibility standards related to the web is another one, and also just inertia in general. People who have existing skills to do things in a complicated way are often reluctant to give those up and do something in a slightly simpler way just because they're so used to doing it in one way. So I think a lot of it is just going to be about institutional procedural inertia to getting people to adapt this. But we've also said as well, a lot of the things that we're talking about with reference to no-code really in some ways exist in terms of existing SaaS products and things like that. So I feel like there's resistance, but also in some ways we're like, yeah, but it's already kind of here. So.
Definitely.
I've got a slightly different take. I think it's the tech is kind of the easy part to adoption here. You know, if we adopt web frameworks, React, the main blocker to adopting these frameworks is the skills, the tech. People struggling with new technology. With these wonderful new no-code creation tools, the main thing I think is, as you said, inertia in education. So people just knowing about these things and knowing that these things will make their life easier. How do you, so it's like you don't know what you don't know, right? So there's people out there working that would definitely make use of these no-code tools, but they don't know about them. So it's all about the education piece for me. It's all about shouting and raving about it and making sure that people are aware of the value that it can bring for a very, very small upfront cost of just kind of learning the tool set. So the main blocker, I think, for mass adoption is it isn't the skills, it isn't the technical side of things, but it's more so the cultural side of things and people opening up. Just like people had to open up to the spreadsheet, because initially the spreadsheet was used by finance teams and real number crunchers in organizations. But now you have, no matter what facet of an organization you look at, you're going to be looking at a spreadsheet. And I think it's going to be very, very similar with no-code tools. I think that's quite an apt metaphor. Right now, we kind of see it in specialized teams in business and enterprise. But I think very soon, we're going to start seeing the kind of floodgates open. Because already I can see people kind of peeking over to different departments saying, how'd you do that? You know, that's pretty cool. Yeah. We want to do that too. And the entry-level skills, that's all you need to be able to take that forward and run with it.
Sounds great. Well, I think you know, I think the good thing about today is you know, after all the talks, after this chat, etc., we now have I don't know how many people are on the phone, on the phones, on the webcam, but you know, we've certainly got a few hundred more people, I would imagine, who can now go out there and, you know, try no code and sort of spread the good word. To sound almost religious there, you know. But hopefully, you know, if we come back and we do this in a year or 2 years, there's a lot more people who have got a job in no code or earning a living from no code. So, you know, that's what I'd love to see. But thank you very much. I really enjoyed that chat. Hopefully the audience did too. And round of applause.